Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video we are going to learn how to draft this beautiful underbust corset. So if this is something you would like to learn, please watch this video to the end and make sure you subscribe to my channel. Give this video a thumbs up as well. So guys, let's get right into the video. So guys, this is my starting point line. I'm just going to mark out my starting point, and after doing that I'm going to mark the waist length, which is 17 inches, and then I'm going to rule the mark. So the next thing is to mark the chest line of 7 inches and the bust line of 9 inches and the underbust of 12 inches. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do right now is to determine the shoulder to shoulder measurement, and mine is 7 inches. So I'm going to mark the 7 inches where I also have the chest line, and the next thing I'm going to do right now is to connect all of the points together. So after connecting the lines, I'm just going to label this my chest line, bust line, under bust line, and waistline. Now I'm going to determine my nipple to nipple measurement, and half of my nipple measurement is 3.5, and I'm going to be marking the 3.5, and then I'm going to use my ruler to mark all of the points together. So I'm just going to use my marker to make it more visible. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do right now is to mark half an inch on both sides of the dart leg. All right, you're going to be marking half an inch on both sides of the dart leg, and from the bust line I will come down by 1 inch, and then I'm going to connect all of the points together. All right, so after connecting all of the lines together, I'm going to be marking the distance between my bust line and my under bust line, and whatever I have, I'm going to be marking it towards the center of the front. Okay, and then I'm also going to be marking the 3 inches towards the armhole area. All right, so I'm going to do just that right now. I'm marking 3 inches towards the armhole area as well, and the next thing I'm going to do right now is to connect the point to where I have my underbust. So I'm just going to use this right now to connect all of the points together. So I'm just going to use my marker to highlight all of the points together so that it is more visible. After connecting all of the points together, the next thing I'm going to be doing right now is to mark all of the measurements I have. So I'm going to be marking the quarter of my bust measurement plus the sewing allowance. So the quarter of my bust is 8.5, and I'm going to be adding 1 inch for sewing allowance, and I have 9.5. I'm going to repeat the same process for the under bust as well. I'm going to be marking the quarter of my under bust plus 1 inch sewing allowance, and I'll do the same thing to the waist. Now at the under bust, you also need to measure the dart intake you're taking away from there and add it back. So if you're going to be joining your dart, you also need to add the joining allowance to it. So I'm going to be measuring the quarter of my waist plus the dart intake and the side seam allowance. So I'm not adding the joining allowance for the dart because I'm going to be closing the dart when I'm cutting out the fabric. So the next thing I'm going to do right now is to connect all of the points together. Right now this is my shape, and your own shape might be different from mine. All right, so the next thing is to add sewing allowance to the lower part of this pattern, because I don't want to add the sewing allowance when I'm cutting the fabric so that I don't forget. So I'm just going to be adding it. I'll also add the sewing allowance at the top here. All right, I'm just using my marker to highlight the lines. So on this half circle here, I'm also going to mark out my sewing allowance, and I will go ahead and cut it out. So before I cut out the round circle over here, I'm going to use this to cut out the back first before cutting out this half circle at the front. So I'm just going to be marking the starting point for the back piece. So if you want to add zipper allowance to yours, you can add it at this point, okay? But I'm not going to be adding zipper allowance to mine. I'll be adding loop. So what I'm going to do now is to trace out the exact same thing I cut out at the front. I'm going to be cutting it out at the back, but first I'm going to highlight the place where I have the dart. So I'll go ahead now and cut this out. So if you want zipper allowance, this is going to be the space for the zipper allowance, all right? But I'm still going to cut it off. So I'm just trying to mark where I'm going to have the dart at the back and also at the upper part of this place. So right now I'll remove the front pattern and then connect where I have the dart. So right now I'm also going to be taking half an inch on both sides of the back dart, and then I'm going to connect the lines together. So once that is done, I'm going to be closing the back dart as well, okay? I'll be closing the back dart. So what I'm going to do right now is to mark out 2 inches away from the point where I marked the zipper allowance, okay? I'm going to be marking 2 inches, and that 2 inches I'm going to be cutting it off, so that's going to be an opening for my loop, okay? So this is pretty much about the back. There is nothing much about the back. So on that line I marked at the front of the line, I'm just going to mark half an inch for sewing allowance, okay? This half an inch is going to serve as the turning allowance for my lining and where I'm going to be stitching the rope before covering it with the lining. So I've cut off the excess I have, okay? But if you're adding zipper, you don't need to cut that excess I cut off, all right? So I'm just going to open the dart. So when I'm cutting on the fabric, this is how I'm going to be closing the dart, okay? I don't want to have any joining. So I'll go ahead now and also cut out the front. So once I'm cutting the front as well, I'm also going to be closing the dart when I'm cutting this on the fabric. So I'll go ahead now and cut all of this on my fabric. So right now I've cut out the fabric and I've ironed my stay on it. Alright guys, so I've gone ahead to iron the stay on both the fabric and the lining, as you can see, and I have my bias that I'm going to use for the casing. I have the round boning which I'm going to be putting around the underbust area, all right? And then I also have my plastic boning which I'm going to be passing through the casing. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to go ahead and sew my bias to all of the places, okay? I'm going to be sewing it at the center and also at the center of where I have the underbust for both sides. So I'll go ahead and also do the same thing very close to where I'm going to have the loops, and also about 2 inches to 3 inches after where I'm going to have the loops. So this is all I have, and once I'm done I'll bring it back to you to see what it looks like. So right now I'm done stitching the bias on all of the fabric, okay? So the next thing I will do now is to place the back on the front piece, and I'm going to do the same thing for the lining, and then I will pin it down. After pinning it down, I'll go ahead and sew it on both sides. So right now I've sewn it on both sides, and I'm just cutting off the excesses I have down below and also the excesses I have on the side. So the next thing is to cut out the rope that I'm going to use for the loops, okay? So I already cut out the rope, and it is about 1.5 inches wide, and you can just cut any length of your choice. And then I'm going to be sewing it down, and after sewing it down I'll be cutting to 2 inches, okay? Now after cutting it to 2 inches, I'll go ahead now and mark out all of these points, okay? I'm marking 1 inch apart. So this point where I have the chalk is where I'll be attaching the loop. So I've gone ahead to attach the loop. As you can see in the picture, I've attached the loop on both sides of this corset, okay? So the next thing I'm going to do now is to cut out the boning, and then I will start fixing the boning. Make sure you use a lighter to burn the edges, both edges, so that it's not going to, you know, affect you when you're wearing your corset. So the next thing is to place the lining on the corset, and I'm going to sew from the top around the neck area here. Okay, so now I've gone ahead to sew the neck now, the part where I have all of the curves, and then I'll go ahead and notch it just like I'm doing. I'm going to be notching all the sides that have pointed edges. So after notching, I'm just going to turn it to the right side, just like I'm doing right now. I'm going to turn it out. So after turning it out, I'm going to be using this round bony on this side that I'm showing you guys now. You can see this side. I'm going to be using that round boning. So I'm just using that round boning to measure the area, just to know how much boning I will need, and I will use that to also cut the other side of the boning, just as you can see. So now I'm taking this to my sewing machine, and I'm going to be placing this from this edge, and then while I'm sewing, I'm going to be pushing it inside. As I'm sewing, I'll make sure I'm pushing the boning inside. Okay, you can see what I'm doing now. When you get to where you have the casing, you can just pull down the plastic boning a little bit so that you don't sew on it, and so it won't break your needle. So you can see how beautiful this is looking like. This is very easy to make. When you have the round boning, it's much more easy. So right now I'm done, and this is what I have after this. So I'm going to be matching the center of the fabric and the center of the lining together, and I'm going to be sewing from that center to the end and come back again, sew from the center to the end. This is what I like doing. I like marking out center so that I will know that I'm on track. So once I'm done doing that, I'm going to be closing one part of where I have the loops. Okay, I'll be closing one part, and the remaining parts I'm also going to be closing it a little. I'm going to be closing it on one side a little, and also close it on one side a little, and then the remaining opening space is where I'm going to be turning this fabric from. So I've gone ahead to stitch all the important places that I needed to stitch together, and the next thing to do now is to bring out the fabric. You can see where the opening is, so that's where I'm going to be turning it from. This process might be a little bit hard because of the boning, but trust me, you will still pull through. So all you just need to do is to iron it once you are done, and you are good to go once you iron it. So guys, this is what I have after I was done, and the next thing I'll go and do now is to close up this opening part. Make sure you are pushing the loop inside. So I'll go ahead now and sew this together. So this is what I have after sewing it together, and I'm going to show you guys the final look of this corset.